So, we've been talking, as we've been talking through the Gospel of Matthew, about the fact that much of the time, when Christians read the Gospel of Matthew, they read it with their church glasses on. They have that lens that's sort of attuned to, what they've heard and sort of the way that they've heard it. And we've seen that, especially as we've gone through the Sermon on the Mount. We've been looking at a couple of things in the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, where we found out that, as we look through it, what Jesus was really saying was, whatever your situation is now, when the kingdom comes and I'm reigning, guess what? It's going to be better. Yeah. It's going to be better, right? And we got to the Lord's Prayer. We talked about the Lord's Prayer and the fact that within the Lord's Prayer, as he's saying, let your kingdom come. Well, what kingdom? Well, the kingdom where he's going to reign. Because guess what happens when he brings that kingdom and he's reigning? Guess what's going to happen? His will be done on earth just like it is in heaven. That's right. Right? So when we talked about the fact that forgiveness in the Lord's Prayer is this idea that it's a gift that God gives to you to free you up. Because if you fail to forgive, what happens? You're not free to love. Your love and your joy and your peace are stolen from you. So when you come to the place where you go, I'm free to forgive, I can let it go. All of a sudden, then you're free to love again. So that's a gift from God that he's given us. So we talked about those things so far, and today we're actually going to be looking at a passage in Matthew 7. Many of you in the room have heard a sentence from Matthew 7, and you've heard it a certain way most of your life, and very, very commonly understood a particular way. And what we're going to find out today, I hope, if that's one of you, that you'll realize that you've been wearing those church glasses. And it's one of those places that because of the church glasses that you've been wearing, it has stopped you from seeing so much more that is there, just simply based on the context. But before we get there, let's talk about Matthew 7 for just a moment. Matthew 7, the last chapter of the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount is chapters 5 through 7. 3 full chapters, one sermon by Jesus, right? One extended sermon. We get to chapter 7, there's lots of good stuff. Judge not, lest you be judged, right? Don't cast your pearls before swine. The golden rule, which is, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, right? So we all have heard those things growing up. One of the passages that a lot of times gets missed in Matthew 7 is one of my favorite passages. And it has to do with God being our Father and how he is, what he is like. And right before Jesus introduces his last topic, he shares this in Matthew 7, starting with verse 9. What man is there among you who, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? If he asks for a fish, will he give him a serpent? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who simply ask? What kind of God do we have? A lot of pastors out there, a lot of pulpits out there, I hear it's the way they present God, it's almost like he's got a big stick and he's ready to whack you whenever you make a mistake. And yet, here's Jesus right in the middle of an extended sermon talking about the Heavenly Father. He says, look, he's just waiting to give you good stuff. He's just waiting to bless you. And all he's looking for is for you to ask him. Is that your view of God? That's what Jesus says he's like. He says that right before he introduces his last topic. And here's how he introduces his last topic. And it's found in verses 13 and 14 of chapter 7. Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. And there are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life. And there are few who find it. Now, this is a fairly well-debated passage itself. But again, I think if we talk about it, we know yes, there is a wide gate, and many people find it, and it leads to destruction. And there is a narrow gate. Well, what is that narrow gate, and how do we know that we have entered it? That is what Jesus is beginning to address through the last topic that he begins to talk about. Now, within this last topic is the sentence that many of you in the room have heard your whole life, if you've grown up in church. And if you haven't grown up in church, you're not familiar with this will still be fun for you, because this will be an exercise in kind of thinking through what the text says and what it doesn't say. But for those of you who've grown up in church, here is the passage. Starting in verse 16. You will know them by their fruits. Heard that, right? You'll know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. Good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits, you will know them. Okay? Everyone's familiar with that. And the interesting piece of that first sentence there, you'll know them by their fruits, is that when you heard me say that, you're in your head, you already did the interpretation. And you already did the interpretation based on either the context or what you've heard. And so there stands the question, which one was it? Because many, many of us have heard and seen, somebody preach or speak about it. I've sat in rooms where people have brought up this verse and used that single sentence. And they look at each other and go, hey, you know them by their fruits. And the person who's hearing it goes, oh, yeah. Without defining anything or without explaining or interpreting anything. It's as though there's this radar thing going on, and the person who's saying it, they already know what they think it means, and so they're saying it to the hearer, and the hearer goes, well, yeah, I know exactly what you mean, because I'm interpreting it the same way. But the question is it right? Is it the right way? Because here's what happens. And I don't know your background, don't know what you've heard about this verse, this sentence, but very, very typically, here's what is assumed. All right? So let's just talk about assumptions for just a second. What is assumed is that there's two things in there. You will know them by their fruits. So what is assumed is that the they, the them, and the their refers to everybody. Okay? So I guess in your head, you just, think if that's kind of, what you've heard, right? So the thing, they is everybody. So it's anybody on the planet, and that the fruits are what they do, their works, or their deeds, or their actions. So the sentence becomes interpreted like this. You will know whether a person has entered by the narrow gate or not. Okay? You will know whether a person is a Christian or not based on their deeds or actions or works. Now, if I were to ask you to raise your hand, which I won't, but if I were to ask you to raise your hand if you've heard it that way, I would bet almost, I'm not a betting person, but I would make a very good guess that the majority of the people in the room would go, yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. It's kind of what I've heard, what I've thought. All right? The question is, does Jesus agree with that? Because it is a very, very typical view. In fact, it's so entrenched that interpretation has been passed down for centuries. For centuries. So by the time it comes to us, it's just naturally assumed. We just hear it and we say, well, yeah, you know whether a person's a believer or not based on their works. Right? Well, before we look at what else Jesus says and put it in its context, let me just put a couple of question marks around that. Let's assume for a second that that's really what Jesus means by what he's saying. Well, if that's true, if I'm supposed to be able to know whether someone's a believer or not based on their actions or deeds or works, well, how many? How many? If I see them do one or two, okay, I saw them do a good work, so now I can say it. Now I can know that they kind of crossed the line. Is that how it works? Is it that, over a period of 4 weeks that they did 20? And so I said, well, over a period of 4 weeks, I saw they did 20. So now I can feel good about, well, yeah, now they made it. Now I can figure out that they're a believer. Is that how it works? In this same sermon, Jesus said earlier, don't do your good deeds in public. Go into your private room. Well, if that's what the person is doing, and I'm supposed to be figuring out whether they're a believer or not based on their works, and I'm watching, but what they're doing is trying to do what Jesus said, so they're not showing anybody their good works. They're praying in the back room. They're praying in private where you don't see them. Well, how does that work? How does that work? And everybody's starting to see it a little bit of question marks around that whole interpretation, and yet that is such a traditional, embedded interpretation that it's really, really hard for us to get our glasses to come off, to be able to see what Jesus is saying. And yet, even from a logical perspective, to try to say, well, yeah, I should be able to just look at a person and kind of figure it out. Well, really? Really? I mean, I can start asking some more questions, but it just makes question mark after question mark after question mark once you go down that road. So, what do we got to do to figure it out? Well, again, remember that key sentence, you'll know them by their fruits, right? Okay. General interpretation is they or everybody. Well, let's look more closely at what Jesus says. You go back to the initial part where he refers to who he's talking about. Let's look at verses 15 and 16 in particular. Beware of false prophets. Beware of false prophets. Who is that? The false prophets. Come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they, who are they? The false prophets, are ravenous wolves. You will know them, who's them? The false prophets. By their, what is that? The false prophets' fruits, right? Okay, so every time it's referring back to whom? The false prophets. Is that everybody on the planet? Okay, so we've dismissed half of the interpretation right there, simply by paying attention to the context. This is not about everybody. This is about a very specific group of people. All right? Very specific. And that specific group of people is false prophets. Okay? So then you say, well, okay, I get it. It's not just everybody. It's not about the whole world. It's about that group that we're aiming at. But what about their fruits? What do I do with that? Because again, this typical interpretation is about they is everybody and fruits is works. Well, okay, if we know they is the false prophets, well, what is the fruits? Because it's like, can you know a false prophet by what he does? Is that how it works? Is it about works? Is this passage about works? Well, a couple of problems, a couple of things to think about there is once we say that it's about false prophets, and you say fruits equals works or deeds or actions, and I've even read some people say, no, it's Christian character. Well, is the way you know a false prophet by their Christian character? That doesn't work, does it? Okay? But let's think about it. If it's works, if it is works, and I'm sitting back and I'm going, okay, I need to be able to identify a false prophet, and the way I identify a false prophet is by what I see. Well, take a look again at what Jesus says. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing. Okay? So if it's about what you see, if it's about what you observed, what is it that you're looking at? What is it that you're seeing? Okay? It says they have sheep's clothing on. They're well dressed. They got the suit and tie. They've got the perfectly parted hair that I don't have to worry about. Okay? All right? So, but let me go further. think about it for just a moment. If it's about what you observe, and what we're talking about is identifying a false prophet, if it is about works or what you observe, what would that look like? Well, let me show you. Yeah. All right? There's your false prophet. That's your false prophet. Okay? Now, if fruits equals works, if it's about their works, if it's about their deeds, then you're looking at the sheep, right? And what are you thinking if what you are observing is a sheep? What would you conclude? Wouldn't you conclude that they were good? Yes, you sure would. And guess what? You would be deceived. Why? Because what you were looking for was their works or their performance or their actions, and their works and actions would absolutely deceive you, because what you would be seeing was a sheep. Was a sheep. I don't know about you, but I've heard some very smooth talkers who everybody loved, everybody thought they were the most wonderful person. And then all of a sudden you begin to listen and go, what? What are they saying? All right, but going further, if we go down just a couple verses in verse 21, he says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Who does the will? Well, what does it mean to do the will? All right? Because again, remember, we're going back to false prophets. So, many will say to me in that day, many what? Many false prophets. And they'll say, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name? Remember, we're talking about false prophets, okay? Have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? So here they are standing before God in the day of judgment. And they're saying, look at what we did. Okay? So if it's about works, they've got something to point to. And guess what they're doing? They are pointing to their works. Think with me for just a moment. If that's what we're supposed to be doing, if we're supposed to be going, okay, I'm looking at the false prophet, I'm trying to figure out if what he's doing is good or bad, okay, and that's what I'm looking at what I'm observing. If that's what it's about, then let's imagine for a moment that someone came in the main door of the church, came down the aisle, they're foaming at the mouth, they're going into seizures, right? They're obviously possessed. They come right up and stand right up in front of me, and I say, in the name of Jesus, come out of him, right? And he falls on the floor, and he's just, and everybody, wow, right? What would you conclude if you were looking at my works? Wouldn't you conclude that I was good? Wouldn't you? Yeah. What does Jesus say? Look at the very next verse, verse 23. Then I will declare to them, depart from me. I not only don't know you, I never knew you. Wow. I never knew you. Okay? Well, what was happening? They were pointing to their works. They were looking, that's what they were looking at, was their works. Wrong. Wrong. They got it wrong. Because they were focusing on works. So what do you do? What do? You say, well, okay, we know we're talking about false prophets. We know we're going to know them by their fruits, but what else can that be? Well, actually in the Bible, the word fruits can be defined or interpreted about 6 different ways. And one of those, by the way, is by the definition of words, the fruit of the mouth. If we were to think about false prophets, and those false prophets look like sheep, they act well, they speak smoothly, they do nice things for people, all right? They're helpful, they're just amazingly wonderful. Okay, how are we to know them? How would you know a false prophet? Wouldn't it be by what they said? Wouldn't it be the fact that what they're saying is not true? Yeah. Well, let's take a look at another passage of Scripture just to make sure that we're on the right track. Because what we have in Matthew 12, by the way, and we're going to be looking at Matthew 12 starting in about verse 33, is the same metaphor, same illustration, very similar context, but instead of talking about false prophets, here he's talking about false teachers, and specifically those false teachers were the scribes and the Pharisees, okay? And what we see in Matthew chapter 12, verse 33, either make the tree good and its fruit good, or else make the tree bad and its fruit bad, for a tree is known by its fruit. And you hear that and you go, yeah, works, right? That's what we're thinking. What does Jesus say? Brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? Speak good things. What's the fruit? Words. Words, doctrine. Doctrine. What is it that determines your eternal destination? Whether or not you believe in Jesus. That belief is made up of words. Verse 34 again. How can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things. Evil man out of his evil treasure brings forth evil things. Verse 36, but I say to you that for every idle word that men may speak, they will give an account of it in the day of judgment. Sound like Matthew 7. Verse 37, for by your words you will be justified. By your words you'll be condemned. So, of course, he's speaking to them as teachers, and in this particular instance, false teachers, right? In Matthew 7, we go back to the same thing. What we have is Jesus saying, beware of false prophets. Because they look good, they do good, they act well. But the fact of the matter is, what they say is wrong. What they say is false. It is error. Listening to a gentleman talk last evening, and one of the things he said was, hey, once you get married to error, it's really hard to get a divorce. Yeah. Let's take a look one more time at verses 15 and 16. Beware of false prophets. Those false prophets will come to you in sheep's clothing. They're going to look good. They're going to be smooth. But on the inside, those false prophets, they're ravenous wolves. And guess what they're going to point to? They're going to point to their goodness. That is the wide gate. That is the wide gate. That is not salvation by grace alone, through faith alone, in Jesus Christ alone. All right? Inwardly, those false prophets are ravenous wolves, and you will know those false prophets by their words, by their doctrine. Do you know how many Christian lives have been ruined because people didn't beware of false prophets? And they're listening and they're thinking, I want to, serve God and I want to do ministry. And then all of a sudden they didn't get the Mercedes in their driveway that they were believing God for. And what happens? What happens when their life doesn't go the way they were promised that it would by that person? What happens when they hear those good words and says, yeah, I'm a little God. I'm a little God. What happens? It's called the wide gate. It's called error. It's broad is the way that leads to destruction. So how do you know? How do you know the false prophet? By comparing it to the truth of the Word of God and standing on the truth, rejecting error. That's how you beware. So my questions to you this morning. Why would Jesus be so concerned about this? Why would he spend so much time saying, watch out for false prophets? Because he knew that they would come. The rest of the New Testament says they're going to come. They're going to sneak in, and they're going to try to steal the freedom that you have in Christ. They're going to distort the gospel. They're going to steal your joy. They're going to steal your love, and they're going to turn the grace of God into something that it's not. And they've been around ever since. Jesus knew, and what he wanted was for us to make sure that we entered by the narrow gate. Amen. And that narrow gate, his name is Jesus. You know? His name is Jesus. You know? What did he say in John 14:6? I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Go through the gate. Well, what makes that so tough? What makes that so tough? What is it about that makes that so narrow? I mean, it seems so simple, doesn't it? It seems so simple to say Jesus offers you eternal life as a gift simply to be received. Well, look at the false prophets. Take them for an example. What did they want to do? See God? See what I did? See what I did? Hey, you know, aren't I good enough? There's something about fallen human nature that wants to be able to stand before God and say, see, I did something. I earned something. And yet the narrow gate says, no. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That's right. And the only way is to come to the place where you go, I can never be perfect. It's in my fallenness, I will never achieve it. And since I will never achieve it, guess what I need? I need a Savior. Amen. I need a Savior. You know how hard it is for people to admit that? That's narrow. That's narrow. That's called humility. When you say, I can't do it. I have to have Jesus do it for me. I have to trust Jesus to do it for me. And yet, right before this, what did Jesus say? You have a Father who's waiting to give you good things. And all you have to do is ask. So my question to you this morning is, have you entered by the narrow gate? Because it's free. It's something Jesus already paid for. It's something he wants to give to anyone who will simply ask and trust him for it. How about you, Christian? Are you aware of the beliefs that you're hearing? You know, for us to misunderstand this passage is misleading in more ways than one, and I hope you realize that. Because if we're evaluating as everybody based on the works, it's stopping us, you know, among other things, it's stopping us from being able to love. Because it's stopping us from standing in his grace and saying, all right, I got here by unmerited favor. It was never about my performance. It was always about what Jesus and you did for me. And my simply trusting you to give it to me and to accomplish it in my life. Because if you stand in that grace, if you have that experience of that grace, you know, the whole preoccupation with works simply goes out the window. What happens is you start going, wait a minute, I've got a God who loves me unconditionally. I've got a God who favors me no matter what. Simply because, and he's able to do that simply because as a demonstration of his love, he was willing to give his son as my, you know, in my place, as my sacrifice. And all I had to do was trust him. Well, what is that about? Because when that gets down into your heart and you go, yeah, God favors me. God wants to bless me. God is ready to give me good things. He wants to see good things happen in my life. He wants me to experience love. He wants me to experience joy. He wants me to experience peace. When you get that, not just here, but when it sinks down here, you ain't worried about works. Guess what happens? You start experiencing that love, and you feel like you're walking around with Jesus wrapping his arms around you. You're walking through your life, you're going, man, I just want to love people.
That's right. That's right.
And guess what you're doing when you're doing that? You're loving God, and you're loving people.
Yeah. That's right.
Why would you even need to worry about works? You're doing them. You know, right?
Yeah.
Amen? Let's pray. Father, I thank you for your love. I thank you for your grace. I thank you, Father, we praise you that you are a God who always is ready to bless us if we're simply willing to ask. Father, may we always remain humble and recognize that it's always about what you do and what your Son has done for us. Father, we just need to rest in that and trust you. Experience your love and grace. Father, I pray if there's anyone here who's never entered that narrow gate, that they might know that your Son is ready to embrace them. And all they need to do is ask him for forgiveness. And Father, we put this all in your hands, give you all honor and glory, and ask it in your Son's name. Amen.